G'day, welcome to People Purpose Place for our Monday evening chat about all things housing. Welcome Darren, welcome Christine.
Good to see you again.
Likewise, always good to catch up.
Yeah.
You're feeling fit and well and energetic, Christine?
Gee, yes, I am, but you're a little glitchy. Darren, are you hearing Rowan as glitchy, or are you hearing him as loud and clear? Is that me or you?
It's actually pretty good. He's pretty clear in this view, so.
Yeah, no, I can understand perfectly well. It's just a little bit glitchy, but you know, we're still struggling with our technicalities, but I'm fine.
Exactly.
How are you, Darren?
Yeah, really good. Really good. Thank you.
And Rowan, how are you doing?
Yeah, fantastic.
Ready to
Excited
go?
about another week in the trenches, and I think each week we feel we come to the table with some more learnings, so that's great to share.
Great. Take it away,
So
Rowan.
I guess perhaps by way of introduction as well, for those of you who are maybe joining us online or watching these broadcasts back at a later time, we are attempting in our own way to address all issues around housing under the banner of People Purpose Place. We're a non-for-profit entity, and we have a process that we believe we can pick anyone up and bring them into a housing solution that suits you. However, it's probably not a mainstream approach, and typically it takes a little bit of work and thinking along the way to get there. So we would encourage any questions. So if you're online and you want to drop a question, some have been a little bit outside of our skill set and expertise, and we'll obviously make something up. No, we'll answer it appropriately. That's it. We'll wing it. And of course, if along the way you go back and review something and say, I'm not sure if I understand or agree with your thinking here, we also love that feedback. So as part of a collaborative way of doing our work is we bounce ideas off each other, and we open our work up to that challenge if someone feels that they really want to answer that. I had a funny anecdote today joining in on a commissioner who was asked to do a review of the housing system, and he was telling us all the data and all the stats and just could not comprehend the big picture question I was asking, which is fine. There's not easy answers. So it just went straight through to the keeper, and we'll leave that alone. Can we talk about the data?
Can we talk about what we can talk about, not try to imagine what a solution might be for anyone, much less for everyone?
Yeah. So if we, the old saying that if you're a carpenter with a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. But that's not the circumstance in all cases. Yeah. So tonight's topic, I digress a bit, but tonight's topic we're jumping into integral housing and what does that look like. And I even wonder if we should be using integral homes rather than integral housing to get us started.
That's an improvement. Integral homing.
Yeah, good one.
And I think that's even reflective of data and headlines that we talk about the number of houses and dollars tipped into this situation. I've got $1 billion to solve something. Well, you're not going to solve anything if you're not addressing the right question.
No.
Anyway, so integral housing. And as we do, we always start with a check-in question just to get us settled into the topic in the moment. And this week, I think, Christine, you've posed a beautiful question, which you can probably convey better than I can.
The reason I picked this question is that we have to be able to use not the old conception of the left and right brain, but the Ian McGilchrist modern conception of the left and right brain and how they work together in order to talk about integral theory, which is what we're going to address today at a very beginner level. You have to use both sides of your brain. So you have to be able to hold two different perspectives at the same time. So our check-in question, which I will ask and then answer myself as a model, and then I'll ask you two to answer, is do you feel prepared, not just as an individual or not just as part of a collective? Here we are, three of us. That's already a collective. If there were two of us, that'd be a collective. But I'm also an individual. Can I hold the perspective of my individual self, as well as not just the collective of the three of us, but the collective of everybody who is listening and who might listen in future? And my answer to that is that I was brought up to be an individualist, like brought up in America by a business family who only wanted intellectual achievement, financial achievement, success in life, that whole bit. So it's really easy for me to take the individual point of view, but it's really a stretch for me to say, okay, I'm here, but who else is here? And not only who else is here physically, but who else is here emotionally or psychologically or intellectually. And I think that'd be my answer is I have a real tough time holding those two perspectives, and I'm going to really work on that tonight. How about you, Rowan and Darren?
Wow, Christine, thank you for asking the question and making a coherent answer.
Well, I'm not sure how coherent, but it was an answer. Go for it.
And I guess I have the same sense as an individual, but as a parent and as a member of this collective and as the wider housing need, there's all these various lenses to look at the topic. I do know at a very core level of my being that there are very few rare moments in my life, and I think this may be true for lots and lots of people, that it's very fleeting. But when you have a collective that nails it, and we've accounted for mum's got a dodgy hip, so we're not going to go up the hills particularly, but we'll take this bushwalk and we'll accommodate her. And you do the bird spotting that works for dad, and you've got grandkids along with you, and this group has had a magnificent bushwalk together. You go, that's it. And it's such a rare event that you have that intergenerational collective. Everyone's in the same state of flow, but it can happen, often accidentally. But I think I'm absolutely confident we can engineer more of the conditions and more of the likelihood of that to happen in our homes.
Man, that's a beautiful answer. Darren, you're going to have to stretch to get a bigger, better answer.
He said sometimes it's better to go last.
I just retire.
I think you're right. Sometimes we like to go to last so we can steal everyone else's answer, but it's set to a higher pedestal to come on from that. I think my part would be that I have learned, and maybe more from the process we've been going over the last year or two, and potentially even with delving deeper into the conversation we're going to have tonight, is that I've also learned for me to be the best part of a team and a greater environment, I've got to try to be the best part of me. Like I've got to be the best version of me. So I think my part at the moment is trying to find a way through better practices and lots of stuff to try and find a way to be the best version of me, because I feel like the best version of me contributes better to a great group. And then once we can have the ability to sit there as a group of people who are all in the right path, then I think we can go on to that next altruistic level of what does that mean when we're in part of a wider community and a wider organization. So I think for me, it starts with me trying to be the best version of myself so that I can hopefully be that person within a greater group.
Wow, those were two fantastic answers. I think I've been totally eclipsed, but it certainly gives love it. It certainly gives us the feeling that each one has built on the previous one.
Yes.
And I think that's where we probably want to go during this session. Isn't it, Rowan? Is that what you got planned for us? Is that we're going to talk about how integral theory builds?
Yeah.
And how it evolves changes.
And I profess I'm absolutely not an expert in this space, but have done through whatever circumstances, willingness being part of it, is done a bunch of work individually myself on my own weaknesses in particular, and then coming to this opportunity to work as a collective, feeling that we can all contribute. The topic for this week is the integral, we said integral housing, but I think the integral home, what does that look like? Might be a really good place to launch, from there. Where can this conversation go? Christine, you introduced to the conversation of integral some years ago, and I thank you very much for that.
My pleasure. You've been a wonderful partner to help explore all this, and bringing Darren into it has just enriched the entire conversation.
We've each got our own part to play, absolutely, as Darren touched on, being the best version of ourselves. Is it something that you can, for a spectator viewing this conversation, or someone just dipping their toe in the water with people, purpose, place, to cover off the topic of integral housing? Is that something that we could do in a 5-minute overview? How do we broach this subject? It's an impossible task, I understand.
It's a biggie, but I think that we have to go back to look at what integral theory means, and not get too caught up in the theory, because in fact, I mean, I had a very lucky introduction to integral theory. I came to it probably 15 years ago, longer now, 20 years ago, and I had excellent teachers who had themselves expanded Ken Wilber's original integral theory. And I think the important thing, if we're going to move into saying we're talking about integral housing, well, maybe we're talking about integral homing. What does integral mean in Ken Wilber's meaning, and where did Ken Wilber come from? I think those are important points that we have to cover off. Is that a good direction for us to take?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be good to, just as a bit of a backdraft, where does integral theory come from, and how does it get to someone like Ken Wilber?
Well, and that is an interesting question, because Ken Wilber, in my view, the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, who's gotten a little bit stale in his ideas. He's my age, exactly, real proper American baby boomer. The whole bit. But still lives in Colorado, So where did integral theory come from? Well, it came from various different directions, which is fantastic, because the entire movement of thought and philosophy and people's behavior in the world changes. And some had already noticed this. Jean Piaget, for example, in the 20s and 30s said, children are not little adults, they develop. Now, there's no such thing as looking at children anymore in our society without seeing them as developing individuals. A 4-year-old is not a 10-year-old. You can ask a 13-year-old to do what you can't ask an 8-year-old to do. An 8-year-old is not a deficient 17-year-old. It's an 8-year-old. So you have stages of development as a child. But what Wilber's predecessor, Clare Graves, thought about, and he thought about this through data first. He didn't develop a theory first. He just asked a lot of questions of a lot of people, because he was interested in how people expand, or how they become who they are. And he began to realize that Piaget left off after childhood, but that we may stop growing physically. Like, I'm still only 5 foot nothing. I didn't grow very well this way, but my personality can or does not have to expand. And what Clare Graves came up with was, through the history of human beings, and let's go back to 300,000 years ago when language first started, as far as we know, or that's our understanding today, where you first can really say that's a Homo sapiens. That thing can talk. It's bipedal. It's got a huge brain. It's got a small jaw. It's got short limbs. It locomotes standing up. It's got opposable thumbs.
Yep.
So how did that creature behave itself? Well, it started out not individualistically, because people are pretty, we don't have claws. We don't have teeth. We've got cosmetic teeth, not biting teeth.
Yep.
So we don't have fur. We can't protect ourselves. So we have to have culture. We have to have other people to protect us. We have to have society. And way back then, 300,000 years ago, you couldn't live without your tribe.
Yeah.
But your maximal size was 150 people, Dunbar's number, probably. We don't really know. And everybody had some sort of kinship relationship to everybody else. Well, what was their way of thinking back then? It's what Clare Graves called archaic, which is what we also call it. I mean, that's pretty archaic, isn't it?
Yes.
And we have in the theory, there's all kinds of colors and levels, and there's spiral dynamics, there's quadrants, and this, that, and the other thing. Let's forget all that.
Yeah.
All we want to do is say, yes, we start out as archaic human beings, and then we move into another stage, which is what Clare Graves called, and Ken Wilber, like him, called mythic. So instead of believing in tree spirits, the unilateral God came into the picture, especially in the monotheistic religions. But, there were gods all over the place in some areas. And there were myths about all the gods, and there were myths about people. And we have the dream time in Australia.
Yes.
Totally mythological. So there's a mythic stage after you go through the archaic stage. And that begins to expand your imagination, where it isn't just the people in the group, and it isn't just the group related to the land as we see Aboriginals here, Indigenous people here, so closely connected still. It moves off into a more imaginative space of mythos, of gods, of heroes, of the hero's journey.
Yes.
The next stage is more tribal. And that's where we first come into wars and expressing a lot of anger and honor killings and things like that.
Yep.
And by the time you're working towards what could be called more traditional,
yes,
you're beginning to have a language that's written down. You're beginning to have books that, and of course in those days, written all by hand by monks, that codify laws, traditions, myths, and whatever else is going on with human beings, how to plant your things. So all of this starts happening after the agricultural revolution, which of course was 8,000 years ago. So we're talking about history now, because history is where you can start to write things down. The next thing that came along didn't come along for a long time. So it wasn't until the Enlightenment in the 17th century where we started to have modern ideas. And in fact, everything that has to do with democracy, with the way we govern ourselves, with human rights, with advanced knowledge, with technology, it all comes in at the modern stage, which really most of the world hasn't gone into in the 20th century. Big part of the world have not gone into through the whole 20th century. But we already, as Europeans, as European descendants, we already started in the 19th century, really moving very strongly into the modern phase. And we started to get very individualistic. Now, here's a very interesting thing about Clare Graves and spiral dynamics. You start with it, because our question was collective, individual. Can you hold both perspectives? You start with a collective stage of development. That's archaic. You go to an individual stage of development. That's mythic. You go back to a collective stage of development. That's tribal. You go to a more individualistic stage of development. You see, it rotates from individual to collective. And those of us who were brought up like I was in a really modern mindset, capitalism, success, money, do stuff, build stuff, make stuff, technology. That's all about me, 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 me. It's not about us. It's about me. And you see this I mean, I was so happy to come to Australia, which I find to be much more collectivist than America, which is so individualistic. And it's one of the things I've always loved about Australia, how collective we are. And that has a lot of reasons behind it. But there are also stages after the modern. Postmodern, which started back in the earlier 19th to 20th century, and of course was mostly post-war and mostly at the beginning centered around the French philosophers. But the postmodern has quite a different feel to the modern. It's much more collective again, and it cares more about others, about rights, about the earth, about connection. And then we take this enormous leap, which humanity has not yet taken. And most of us, I don't feel that I have. I think I've had sort of flashes of insight of what integral might be, but I'm not there yet. And which I think is probably realistic. Boy, you go to an integral theory conference, a conference based on integral theory.
Yeah,
everybody there is already integral, you know, and they probably well are not, in my estimation, because I'm there for one thing and I'm not, and some of the rest of them are on my level. So there's this enormous leap that Clare Graves already postulated back in the 1920s and 30s that goes from postmodernism into something much more inclusive. Here's where collectivism really comes together, because as an individual, you can make a collective out of yourself. So you can express all parts of yourself, not just your one form of intelligence, but all of your intelligences, whether music or art or feeling or whatever it is. And you can develop in all of your, not just the levels that I've been talking about, all of those lines of intelligence, all of the states, which are states of consciousness, and all of the types, which are personality types. So this is a very complex theory. It's got endless add-ons and charts and beautiful models, and you know, it goes on and on and on. But let's stop and think how this applies to housing. If human beings individually evolve through their whole lives, they don't stop growing. They stop growing physically at 20, 25, but they don't stop maturing and evolving, hopefully until you fall off your perch. I hope that's the way I'll be doing it. I hope I'll still be going up the spiral of spiral dynamics, which is part of integral theory, until I fall off my perch. But the other thing that we have to do when we're looking at this, and before we get to housing, is say all of this is changing in every person at all times and in all societies at all times. So it's probably not the case that, although I've just described myself as a very modern human being, I'm not 100% modern, nor is anybody else, nor is anybody else 100% postmodern or 100% integral. And at any one time, you may be expressing something that you never really accommodated or really grew through properly in the first instance. I'll take myself as an example. Tribal, the red meme, tends to be quite expressive of anger. So a beautiful side of tribalism is protection, looking after the group. But a pretty ugly side is getting mad and punching each other out. There's a lot of that. And is there still a lot of that in the world?
Absolutely.
In the modern world, you know, the quote civilized or developed world, as well as the rest of the world. So how are we going to look at all these aspects and fit the development of the individual plus the development of the group? You see where I'm getting to the collective and the individual? They're all moving. How do we fit that into what we might call integral housing? And my suggestion about this, oh, go ahead. Jump in.
I was just going to add one thing that I have as an observation of it over the time, noticed also that you're 100% right. We tend to float up and down the spiral in our own individual journey, but until we can actually integrate the components below us, it's actually very hard to what you call looking for the word, but properly get to that level or stage. You really need to accept and integrate all the components underneath you. And as you said, you may not take all of them on 100%, but ultimately you need to integrate, some or all of the components of each of those stages, because obviously they form part of us. And there's certain cultures around the world that have tried to jump from, something maybe mythic into something capitalistic, and that hasn't worked because all of the stages in between maybe haven't been integrated. And so I even find that journey myself. We're only talking before about someone getting a bit agitated during a basketball game and returning to some of those the rage-driven stuff, and that's the red in everyone at some level coming out. So I quite often myself, if anything, the integral part for me is an awareness of where I am or where others are in their journey, so that I can understand best how to potentially help them or help myself or help our group form a better or work better together, as a better understanding of where exactly they're sitting in that spiral. But it'd be interesting on your thoughts on bringing that approach to homing. Where do you think that works, Christine?
Well, I think you've already said it way better than I could have. And I think that Ken Wilber also said it better than both of us.
Yep.
So Ken Wilber's phrase for going from level to level, so from archaic to mythic, or from mythic to tribal, or tribal to traditional, or traditional to modern, modern to postmodern, postmodern to integral.
Yeah.
And God knows how many more stages there are above that. Claire Graves said, I give up after this. That's as far as my concept will reach. Ken Wilber said, you must transcend the old stage and include it.
Right.
There's something in myself that has to be able to relate to tree spirits, to archaic lifestyles. There's something in myself that has to relate to mythic. Now, it doesn't mean I have to be a religious person in a monotheistic religion. It doesn't mean I have to be religious in terms of paganism, but it means that I have to have accepted the way that we do sometimes in our society, Joseph Campbell's idea of mythology. And each stage needs to be transcended, but brought along with you. Otherwise, you do what I've done, which is reject my tribal self, the anger part of it. I'm happy with the protection part, but I'm not happy with the anger part. So I haven't completely included that. So I can't transcend it yet. Now, here's the question. If we're going to have these groups of people, each one of whom is going through his own individual evolution, and the group itself has to go through some kind of group evolution. How are we going to make it work in a household? If we're only talking about a small number of people, say 5, how are we going to find the 5 individuals who either have the same stage of development or understanding for enough stages of development that they can all work together? And I think, and then how do we keep the bigger perspective? So we want to keep the perspective of I'm an individual, but I'm also in a collective. How do we keep the bigger perspective of the group? So say our homing group, how do we keep that in mind as well, so that the group can evolve just like each individual is evolving and going up the spiral? And, I think one of the things that I noted about in my 20 years with integral theory, people have happily given up the idea that there's only one direction and it's up, and thought expanding this way is the best way to be able to incorporate, to get broad enough to incorporate those lower levels, I've already said it, lower, those original levels of development, and pull them up with you, transcend and include. I don't know how we're going to apply it to housing, but I think that everything we're doing is looking for a way to apply it to housing. And might I point out that although most people have never heard of integral theory, everybody is infected with it.
Yes.
Yep.
Everybody, there is no philosopher today who, maybe they haven't studied Ken Wilber, they never heard his name, but their thinking is evolutionary. Their thinking is dynamic. Their thinking is about change. Their thinking is about how each stage turns into the next stage. And that's right across the board. So although Ken Wilber is sort of an odd guy with a funny following and has gone off in strange directions, in my view, he has influenced everyone in the modern world and many people in the non-modern world.
Yeah.
So how are we going to apply this to homing? Boy, that's where we have to get creative. Take it away, boys.
And I think
because I don't know the answer to that one.
With the background of what you said there, and I really like that idea of transcend and include, but with the work we've been doing, Rowan, and specifically you spending time with different groups, how have you found the spiral dynamics theory explain to you some stuff about groups? Like what have been your observations?
Yeah, I guess, thank you, Christine, for the recap and explanation, because every time covering this content and conversation, I get value out of it. And I guess any group only needs sufficient to work. So we don't need to have a perfection. And what we've found in the people, purpose, place process is that if we have enough guideposts along the way, or a theme or a thread that we can follow, and we have enough care and compassion for our fellow group mates, that we will understand that they're evolving along a theme line between the guideposts, however you want to frame that, towards a journey that suits all of us. So at the outset of People, Purpose, Place, we start with, is there a common purpose, theme, idea? To use a tangible, to try and be illustrative and clear about a very physical example. There's a block of land on Ginn Road in the Atherton Tablelands. It is absolutely idyllic, beautiful country parcel of land. Now, there is a providence and a story. So I could just tell you that and see who wanted to turn up. And if I gave you no more information about it, you might turn up expecting to see native flora and fauna. You might expect to see a creek, rural setting. Then if we continue that conversation a bit more and we built a more integral view of the parcel of land, we might talk about some of the history of that parcel of land and say this used to have a rail corridor through here, which would have actually had coal, steam, train tracks through there. And you can see remnants of the ramparts for the bridge, but it's now long gone, and that crossed the creek here. So you can get some of that history and then appreciate that would have been, the countryside would look vastly different with a train up and down there every day, every week, blowing coal, soot, and making a racket through the countryside, which is today got tree kangaroos transversing from one piece of rainforest to another piece of rainforest. So it's a vastly different parcel of land now. Now this is 3 minutes later, and your understanding of this parcel of land is a more integral parcel of land. You're much less likely to turn up with dogs or cats. Domesticated animals probably don't fit now that you've got this larger picture, and it's only taken us a few minutes to get a better understanding of the land. So the people who would join this group are likely to be fewer people, because some people are very attached to their domestic pets, and they'll say, it sounds beautiful, it sounds lovely and idyllic, but doesn't suit my pets anymore. So I've opted myself out. And that, I think, is part of the process of the People, Purpose, Place framework. I think it is an integral understanding that I'm still at a novice stage of what this this home will be, because we've only got a sketch on a bit of paper today of what the home is.
Mhm.
Now, it is actually a fairly advanced sketch, and there's some beauty and delight in the design as well, which is another learning journey. So we start the design journey talking about the east face and the west face being aligned with the sun path. So in the tropics, you get the smallest area of the house exposed to direct sun, and then the rest of it is sheltered from the prevailing weather, and generally you've got a bit of shade. And again, your design journey has now come along from a complete and utter novice to a more evolved understanding of the design. That for me is just a part of the process around an integral way of looking at the home.
Yep.
And we only need sufficient. It might not be that we have 5 people who eventually evolve to an Olympic level of equestrian performance, as some of us in this group have. It's not necessary to be a resident in that house.
No, got nothing to do with it. Well, it has everything and nothing to do with it. But it's beautiful. The examples you're giving are examples of starting somewhere and expanding out from there, and taking the initial thoughts with you and transforming and including those and expanding them. I think if that isn't integral theory, I don't know what is. And of course, when you say we don't need much, this is the tome that I learned from. Look at this thing. It's almost 800 pages. We don't need that shit. I mean, it was wonderful learning it, and Peter Bureau's a genius. And I really expanded my own understanding of myself and everyone else through really going into this. But we only need an idea of how do things go from here to there? How do we expand? How do we go through the conflicts and the circuitous labyrinths that are part of our personalities and our minds and our bodies, and together somehow expand each other and the group. And I think that's what integral housing will be about in the end, is how expansive can our housing be? How expansive can our homing be? Because the most expansive you can be isn't about buildings. It's about spirit.
Definitely. And I think maybe that's even a good, I don't know whether we got the diagram there to sort of help people understand exactly how the spiral works. But I think one of the things that you've commented on that I see as very, very important is, you know, unfortunately, when we go to these things, as you said, everyone tends to, in today's world, talk of everything as a hierarchy rather than any other situation. But the spiral is really only stages of development. And I really like the way you put it, that we're all just trying to get inclusive at our stage. So whatever that stage is, we're all just aiming to get horizontally to be the best version of that stage that we can be by being the best version of ourselves. So we can't be something we've never transcended that level, but we can certainly be the best version of ourselves. And I think the best version of ourselves is normally, it gives us the greatest opportunity to be the best of a group. And we've seen that live, you know, with this idea that if we're working together as individuals trying to be the best individual we can, we've had those moments where we've come together as groups and gone, wow, that's amazing. How does this group of people that on face value have so many differences also get to a point of a high level of inclusiveness? And I think that that statement you made of, you know, including everything, being inclusive of that whole stage is something that all the tools that we're trying to put together are about. How do I improve as a human to be the best part of this inclusive group? And then once we got an inclusive group, what can that look like in a home? And how can that, and as you've said a few times, that has nothing to do with the building. You can be in a shit box and go, wow, how good is that to be here with these people? And we've had those moments, you know, we were talking about it a couple of Thursdays ago, you know, probably a group of people, you know, with health issues and all sorts of stuff, being in synchronicity in that moment with a sense of, wow, everyone is caring and sharing for each other. And I think the reason that this is important is because we've gone so far away from that inclusiveness. And I think in today's society, the work we're doing is incredibly challenging because you outlaid one of the simplest versions of spiral dynamics and integral theory I've heard, but it's still really complex, right? So
it's very complex.
So
it's
how do we take that?
Complex.
Beautifully complex, exactly.
Stupidly,
and how do we take
that and beautifully?
Absolutely. How do we take that level of complexity, but make sure that everyone can understand it? And I think that's in real context, this idea of the best version of me working as the best version of a group. And that, I don't know, that it's definitely a feeling rather than a thought, but that feeling you have when you're in a group of people, and we talk about it with our group that we're in, that feeling of trust, a level of comfort, a level of transparency, a level of putting down all of the stuff that we pretend to be with that group. And that's really, really special in today's world and in any world. And if we can help other people try and find that place, I think it's worth unpacking all the complexity to get there.
I think,
and yet not overburdening the intellectual side of what did Clare Graves think, and where did he come from in history, and why do we care whether people started speaking 300,000 or 10,000 years ago? We don't care really. What we care is, do you have enough of an idea of, if you will, teleological, like that the world is actually improving, and that you are able to improve, and you can help everybody around you improve by improving yourself, and everybody around you can help you improve yourself by helping improve themselves in the group. And isn't that something that, we don't have to call it integral homing, but it feels very connected and homey. And I think we want to be able to have people have a feeling of connection and a feeling of privacy, a feeling of communalism and a feeling of individuation. And I don't see another way for modern human beings, not necessarily in the Wilburnian sense of modern, but for today's human beings to take advantage of integral theory such that we can inject it into our homing concept and really try to improve people's, not just their ability to pay for their housing, but their lives, their feelings, their connection to other people.
You put that absolutely beautifully. Like, I don't think we could have articulated. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you've said that sometimes one of the things that integral organizations around the world, they get off into these think tanks, but how do you actually apply that? And what you've just said there is a true embodiment of what it would be to be integral, which is maintaining a sense of an individual, but embracing the real special things that happen when we come together as a group. So I think you're right. We might be in a space where we can be actually trying to apply integral theory in a way that is genuinely benefiting people, not just in those homes, but everywhere. I think everyone who touched by those people would know it. What do you think, Rowan?
Absolutely. I think we all resonate, tune, are aware of people when we bump into them, and there's that sense of connectedness, or that person seems to to be in a good state. And if your neighbour was in a thriving home and you were not, you've got an example, and you knew your neighbour, and they were introducing you to a community rather than this living on a digital screen and being connected via app, which I think is a really unhealthy current addiction that we have, which is probably just a symptom of our loneliness and our a bit lost in the wilderness. If we can put that stuff down and actually thrive as humans in a home, it's an exemplar to set for families, associates, the neighbourhood, etc., etc.
And how good would that feel? How good would it feel to, how the feeling is when you feel like you've taken a step towards your own health, or your own inner equanimity, or your own ability to be kind or even indulgent to other human beings, even to yourself. How hard is all that? And the thought that you could actually achieve that in a group is really inspiring to me. But I don't want to underestimate how hard it is. We may not have to study this, very big thing, but we have to study ourselves, and we have to. We have to make ourselves our subject of study, such that we can really feel into where we need to change and where we need to where we could expand. What could we expand into?
And I think 100%. And the way you've actually mentioned it there, I think just listening to you, I'm having, we talk about the limbic system responding to stuff, but even just you articulating that environment and what that could be, I have a sense of well-being. Like there's a sense that I'm understanding physically what you're saying in words. So I could actually, I'm having the sensation of saying, wow, wouldn't that be a great place to live? Like imagine that level of sense of well-being that would come with being with a connected group of people who have a shared desire to be the best version of themselves. That's something that's pretty special. And I think if we could help one group do it, it would be a massive step forward, never alone if we can find a way to help lots of people do it. And as you said, it's not, I think one of the things we'll have to be aware of is that, as you said, it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be a linear path. And what might work for one group might not work for another group. And just as the spiral goes up and down, I'm sure the groups are going to go up and down. And I think the expectation that things are going to be difficult is probably a good place to start, rather than the expectation of, what you just said, articulating enough for me to go, wow, that would be great. There's also the reality of the fact that let's start with the understanding it's going to be challenging.
But I also think that, what I have to throw in there is that I was struggling to actually stay connected and not just go into my head to speak about a subject that I know quite well that is very difficult to compress.
Yep.
And so I was losing touch with my own connection to myself and to you and to the audience because I was going into my head. And what you've observed, and isn't that an important thing to be able to notice about yourself? Because what you noticed, Darren, was that you had somatically taken all that in and it made you feel good, whereas I was doing too much of this. So thanks for that, because what that made me do is check in with myself. And isn't that the most important thing? You don't need to correct anybody else. They're just doing what they're doing. That's not that, in a funny way, that's not even your business.
Yeah.
But you have to check in with yourself. And that's what you did beautifully, Darren, just there. And that brought me to myself, more to myself. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. And I know Rowan had said it before in regards to, trying to fix his mistakes or something along those lines. And I think one of the things that I think we're all working on is this idea of acceptance rather than improvement. And I think the idea of saying, look, I am who I am. I have my strengths and my weaknesses. But if I can also be aware enough of myself, then maybe I can stop when things get, hang on, I'm going off in a stage there, but also be willing to let in those moments me articulating to that before is not a default position for me to get to a point of accepting my bodily reaction to something. But I think that idea of unfolding and accepting ourselves makes a group, the vulnerability of that makes a group so much or so better connected, I think, absolutely.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and we use the phrase and we talk about being prepared to do work individually on yourself, be prepared to then work together as a group for a common purpose, and understand that that's almost going to be never in sync with anyone else. My own personal journey has been my own personal journey, and I've tried to work with you as a group, and I have loved and enjoyed every moment of this connection that we have as a group. But there's common daily experiences where we're not in sync. You know, that's
right.
Within this conversation, in the next 5 minutes, there'll be moments where we won't be in sync.
Yeah.
But we have an acceptance that that's okay. We have an awareness that that might be the case, and it's not a blaming exercise. It's okay. When we are, we'll move together, and when we aren't, we'll each be working on our own stuff.
And the interesting thing about this is that, of course, because we're actually trying to do a project in the world where you create something that exists in the world, a house, a home. But everything that we talk about has nothing to do with design, building materials, architects, licenses, approvals. And yet, what's the point of getting together? The point of getting together is not only to feel good, but to do good. Part of the doing has to be, in our situation, creating this building or a set of buildings. But the buildings will be nothing if they aren't inhabited by people who are expanding all the time. And the buildings have to reflect the ability for people to get together, to expand together, and to separate themselves and expand in their own lonesome time. And boy, I think it's a big trick, what we're trying to put together, but I think it's a beautiful goal.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, when you I think we were only having a conversation at the time when you said, oh, it's almost like it's integral housing, you know, threw it away in a line that just came off your tongue, but it's very much that idea of integrating everything. And it's interesting, after we've come up with lots of different names or ways to explain the process that we're doing, as you said, one of the things we've come across is the fact that there's no use talking about the solution of the housing or the bits and pieces until the other stuff comes in place, which is why the name of our not-for-profit, you know, people first, then a purpose, and then only when those two things have occurred can you actually discuss a place, which is almost counterintuitive. And that's one of the challenges we have, is that everyone wants to jump to where's the place, how do you solve housing affordability? Well, the answer is start with the people and listen to the people.
And absolutely, I think when you start to talk to practitioners about can structure and can a house and can design influence people working together and interacting together, absolutely it can.
Yes.
But that's such a down the road sort of conversation until we get the people and the purpose lined up first. You can then do the architectural niceties later, which are necessary, along with the financial niceties and the town planning. You know, all of those things are necessary, but you know, much more bigger gains to be had by thinking about the people first and getting a purpose to bind us together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to see whether Colby might have that image he can put up. It might just help other people who are coming back to this later on. You might need to just make it a bit larger. Yeah, cover my face up. I could just have it underneath there. I know, yeah.
Yeah, you can cover my face. Cover mine up. Give everybody a sense of relief. Cover my face.
Maybe even full screen.
So, I mean, maybe if you can try and get a little bit larger, Colby, it doesn't matter if it covers us, because it's more that if people want to go back and have a look later on, they can do that. So, as Christine was talking to, and it's good how they've sort of almost turned it upside down a bit. So it's a reverse pyramid, so people don't think that getting to the top is necessarily the goal, because each one of those, and you know, the traditional spiral dynamics uses these colors, which is, don't know whether you can all see there, but beige, purple, red, blue, orange, green, yellow, turquoise, and coral. And Christine gave us the other explanations, which are really handy to understand the context, not just the colors, but that idea of, you know, survival stages right the way through to, you know, altruistic versions. But I think you really explained quite well. And I think it probably makes more sense to me, even just by having this conversation, this idea that each one of the stages, you go from an individual stage to a us stage. And it's almost like we're doing that exactly in the house, isn't it? No matter where you are,
Yes.
we're giving you a sense of you and a sense of you as an individual. But the beauty and the passion and the connectiveness that comes with the next stage, which is really that inclusive us stage, which we all, as you mentioned, we're all tribal animals. So we're built with that bit to become included as a group. So thanks, Colby. You can probably drop that now if you wanted to.
Well, yes, and most of us know the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Interestingly, he starts out with shelter, food, water. And
yes.
One of the most inspiring things that I learned from Peter Bureau and his great big tome and his brilliance is that we really needed another layer underneath home, shelter, food, water.
Yep.
Which is connection, human connection, society. Yeah. Because you can find examples everywhere of people sacrificing their lives, not just their homes or their food or their water, for their offspring or for their friends or for their parents or for their group. And if that's the case, the most important thing for a human being is to be connected to other human beings. And I truly believe that, even though I've spent most of my life struggling to be an individual, achieve and succeed and all that kind of shit, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But how do you actually have a true feeling of satisfaction? It seems to really come most from connectedness, and that connectedness comes before everything. So you reverse that spiral, as you pointed out, Darren, and you end up with the big base of what everybody has to have. And then you have self-actualization or self-transcendence, because Maslow did add another layer at the very top at the end of his life. At the top, how do you, and it feels constricting, like, oh, only a few people are going to make it there. I'm not going to make it. If most people can't make it, I'm not going to. And that's what I like about the spiral going this way, because it says, I think there's room for all of us up here.
There's unlimited potential. It's a matter of do we get there is our own journey. You know, each of us have our own capacity and willingness. You know, if you get to a stage,
but you're never going to get there by yourself.
No, I like that too, and I think that's a very important part. Is this whole idea that connectiveness comes first, and at the moment we know that our normal housing, the accommodation stuff that's happening out there, is completely at odds with us building any real connection. The only way we have at the moment any connection is it has to be a familial group inside the home, but that's not the bulk of people. So, and
they have to be in front of a screen.
Correct.
Because there's no place for them to get together except when they're eating, and mostly they're eating in front of a screen these days.
Yeah. No,
so they're not attending to each other, they're attending to something collectively, but it's a sterile experience.
Yeah, very powerful way to put it.
And the screen connection is just about bits of information. So it's data points rather than actually any real connection.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Beautiful.
I've really enjoyed the conversation.
I have too. I don't know whether anybody's bothering to listen to this, but boy, I'm having a great time. No, it's so, because each one of us seems to understand the other, and we're really having a great conversation. It's fantastic. And this is what we're looking for in our integral homing, aren't we?
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And things that are tougher than this that wouldn't go on a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. But then you have to go through that. And I think, you mentioned Ian McGilvray there before. He's talking about the fact that, nothing ever really good comes from that comfort space anyway. So, working through those difficulties and challenges, and even mentioned before about sharing your difficulties and challenges as a way to build a level of connection that you can't normally have by, everyone singing Kumbaya and thinking it's all going to be happy when that's not really the case. So, and that's literally an hour is zoomed across. We have literally just passed the hour mark. So I wondered on that basis, did we want to have a checkout question? Is that a good way to round up the session, do you think?
Yeah, think one up for us, Darren. We'll answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came into this originally thinking that we were going to be discussing a lot of the philosophical, technical components of the integral spiral theory, but I've actually come away with more tangible, thematic, limbic understanding of what we're trying to achieve rather than just the technical bit. So I didn't expect that, but I'm grateful for getting there. And I thank you both for helping me have that level of consciousness. So I appreciate it. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Our pleasure to have the conversation. Christine, how about you? Got a check out for tonight?
Well, I still love integral theory, and I love to talk about it, but I do feel like the more important thing is to have a feeling of connection whilst you're having that conversation. And I do feel as though that happened tonight. It doesn't always. You can go to an integral conference where everybody thinks they're integral already, which they aren't necessarily, and not always there. If some of them are there, well, they aren't always there. But do you have the connection? And I just to say one quick thing about my favorite conference in the world was the Integral European Conference, which I've presented at and gone to many times in Hungary. And they had a very interesting approach. They started in the morning with meditation, a keynote, and then everybody split up and did intellectual work. So worked on this. Then lunch, and you'd go into the emotional work. So everybody was doing group work with leaders and this and that, really somatic, really embodied. And then in the evening, we'd do social, sacred, or artistic work, sometimes integral comedy, which is hilarious, but you don't find many comedians who are integrally informed. And isn't that an interesting thought? Because a house gives you the opportunity to speak, to be intellectual, to work together, to collectivize, to have some sacred or artistic or really beautiful socializing time together, not just always working away at whatever you're working at. So I guess I see our house as a little bit like the integration of that particular integral conference, which I really admired, and really admired the people who put it together. And I think it really fit in with the feel and the real depth of integral theory.
Yeah, perfect.
Rowan, how about you? Did you enjoy tonight?
Absolutely. Loved the conversation as I often do, having sitting down with you two in particular. Some of the paradigms about how the world can expand how this process can expand our thinking about homes. I think absolutely we should be aiming to thrive and have our best self evolve and come forward, and then do that with other people is what I would hope these homes provide the architecture and the framework for, so that we leave behind a legacy of great humans achieving all of their potential, rather than just existing in a commercial world, going 9 to 5, watching screens and being our isolated little bumps on a log.
Yeah, awesome.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful note to end on, Rowan. Beautiful.
So thank you. I think we might wrap it up there. And next week we're going to have, hopefully, we're going to have a live guest in our podcast. So we're going to mix it up and trying to get a few guests in maybe every second week. And we've got a gentleman who's got an amazing social conscience and spirit and a bit of a story to tell. So hopefully we'll have some time with Russell next week. He's just been put on the spot. So
yeah, perfect.
Great.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you very much.
Namaste.
Thanks,